Brace yourself. Better pass up anytime now. Collect yourself. Things will never be the same in a sad, sad world. Walk around the light a bit, trying to make the pieces fit to a puzzle with a million missing pieces. When I'm feeling fine is when I discover that I'm afraid to blow my cover, and there's something very wrong with this. So slip back in your hole.
Okay, welcome everybody. Good to be with you today. I use the word everybody with a maybe not in the literal sense. I want you to think about a word you've probably heard a million times. And some of what we're going to do today is going to be a bit of review, at least for Ray and Carlos, who've taken my humanities class. You took what, like 2 days of my humanities class, Sarah?
2 days?
2 days. Yeah, Sarah Resnick dropped my class, broke my heart. I've just now gotten to where I can get out of bed in the morning. The depression is worn off. Word is wisdom. You should think about, what's the word wisdom mean to you? Yes, Sarah Resnick.
Wisdom is the accumulation of experiences over time.
Accumulation of experience over time. I like that you went right for experience. You didn't start with book learning, but you went right for experience. I know someone who would agree with you very much. Well, I don't know. That's Emperor Constantine the 11th, the last Roman emperor. I was thinking it was going to be Aristotle next to me. He may or may not agree with you, but Aristotle's going to agree with you. Naya, what do you think of when you hear wisdom?
I feel like it's like the gradual application of like knowledge like that it's attained. I feel like it's definitely learned like a skill.
Learn like a skill, gradual application of knowledge. Ray, what do you think?
Same as what both of them said. Yeah, the gain of knowledge through experience.
Experience, yeah. Carlos, you want to throw anything in there?
I mean, what they said is just like the general overall like consumption of knowledge. That's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of wisdom.
So what you're saying is the ladies all copied off of you. Yeah. Nice. You know, ladies, is an ethics class, and this is not very ethical to be stealing Carlos' answer. Yeah. So I like that I like a lot of the terms that got thrown out. So knowledge gets thrown out, and that's a core ingredient of wisdom. The consumption of knowledge, I like that, because knowledge is life-giving. It feeds the mind, and at least in a poetic sense feeds the soul, perhaps in a more literal sense if that's your worldview, but at least in a poetic sense knowledge feeds the soul. So you do consume knowledge in that sense. Combine that with experience, knowledge gained. So we've got knowledge gained through more traditional, I tell you things you don't know and then you know them, or the book tells you things you don't know and then you know them. And then the knowledge that you gain from experience. But then it's not just stockpiling. It's not just consuming. It's applying, the way Naya said, the application of knowledge. There's, if you ever seen the movie, The Nutty Professor? No, The Nutty Professor is a good movie, but there's a movie called The Absent-Minded Professor. It's an old. And I asked if I star in that movie. The picture's so little, I could probably hit you with a chair and nobody would know. And I post it to YouTube and nobody would know. That's sort of a stereotype, the absent-minded professor type, the person who has tons of learning, tons of book knowledge, but doesn't know what to do with it. Can barely tie his shoes, and that I am kind of that person. So there is sort of a gap in my wisdom. Anybody here speak Greek? Me neither. I took one semester of Greek.
I can read Cyrillic, but I can't read Greek.
Oh, she mentioned Cyrillic. So here's my level of Greek knowledge from one semester of Greek in grad school. I know enough Greek to where I can look at a page of Greek and say, yep, that's Greek. And I know enough Greek to where I can look at a page of Cyrillic and mistakenly say, yep, That's Greek. And I can very badly sound it out. But there's a couple of terms. Of course, they don't look like this. Greeks have their own.
Greek cursive.
Well, that's not Greek cursive. That's Latin cursive. That's just transliterated into our language or into our alphabet, and then magnified to the point of great distortion. But there are two Greek words that I'm very familiar with, and they are philo and sophia. Philo means love, and sophia. Anyone remember or know? Wisdom. Yes, philo is love. Sophia is wisdom. Any ladies, or Carlos, is your middle name Sophia? No, ladies? All right. Well, if you have any friends or family named Sophia, their name means wisdom. You take these two words, philo and Sophia, love and wisdom, and you squish them together, and you have what we're doing right now. You have philosophia, or philosophy, which literally means the love of wisdom. Where we are right now in this course at the beginning, I call this module 0. Okay. So we begin module 1 next week, and that's when we get right into the core content of this course. Module 0 is groundwork. It's background. It's not content as much as it is context to help all the things you're going to start learning make sense. We're kind of building the bookshelves that you'll put the knowledge on that you're going to consume. I guess I should have had it be a pantry. That wasn't the best metaphor. You've thrown me with, your disrespect, Naya. You've thrown me. You've made it hard to think.
Some more food in there, so you can consume that food knowledge.
Yeah, I'm going to consume some LaCroix. Philo LaCroix. So one of the key figures in philosophy, ethics is a branch of philosophy, and perhaps the most important figure in philosophy is Socrates. Socrates is not the first Greek philosopher, and he's not the first philosopher. Philosophy is actually a much more ancient discipline than we're familiar with. Philosophy doesn't begin in Greece 3,000 years ago. Philosophy begins in Africa tens of thousands of years ago. But what we don't have from the earliest philosophers is a written record. What the Greeks do, and often you'll hear that philosophy begins in Greece, and that Thales, who's the first Greek philosopher that we know of, could you grab the door for me, Rhea? Thales, who's the first Greek philosopher we know of, you'll hear him called the first philosopher. That's not accurate. People were doing philosophy. Thank you, Leo. Who's the other book from? Okay, thank you so much. See you, man. So people were doing philosophy tens of thousands of years ago. But what the Greeks did is they transformed it into a way of life, and they gave it its name. The most important of the Greek philosophical figures is this fellow Socrates, who famously said, unlike the people he was competing with, they call themselves the sophists, which basically means the wise guys. They went around saying, we know it all, and we'll teach it all to you if the price is right. Socrates says, I don't know anything. In fact, the only thing that I do know is that I don't know anything. Socrates based his work on not his knowledge, but his absence of knowledge. He says, I don't know anything, but that's not okay. So I'm driven not to push my views on you, but to have conversations with everyone I come across so that I can fill in the almost infinite gaps in my knowledge. And that's precisely why he's come to be recognized as one of the wisest men who've ever lived, because he recognized that he had so much left to learn. People in his own day, a core of them loved him and followed him around as closely as the disciples of any religious figure followed their master around. Most people found him really obnoxious. He compared himself to a gadfly, a buzzing, biting insect. He says, I'm the gadfly of Athens. So here's what he would do. So Sarah Resnack, let's say you're on your way to the store. All right. And Socrates would stop you. Sarah, what are you doing? I've given you enough to improv.
Shopping around.
Shopping around. Why?
Groceries.
Why do you want groceries?
To eat food.
Why do you want to eat?
To live.
Why do you want to live?
Existence.
What is existence? Now, at what point in this exchange, because you're just a poor innocent person, just trying to go buy some Cheetos and do you like Cheetos? I don't really like Cheetos either. I don't know what that's where my mind went. You're just trying to buy, a loaf of bread and a can of soup and
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Just heads up, today's a great day to take advantage of the low counts by ensuring that your agenda boards are meeting the requirements of the non-negotiables. Make sure you're getting your MAGs up to date and posted, as well as your benchmark trackers. If you have those, get them updated and posted. We'll be coming around this week to check that, so take advantage of that today, as well as good time to get those agenda bulletin boards refreshed like you were supposed to before Christmas break. Take care of this building so it looks nice, but I do appreciate you all being here. Take advantage of the low count today and have a fantastic Monday.
anyway. So here's minding your business, and Socrates is in your face with all these questions. Do you think that would be annoying?
Not really.
You wouldn't be annoyed by that, Naya. Would you be annoyed by that?
I wish I'm trying to get out there quickly into my family and trying to feed him.
Yeah. So, Sarah, you might have been one of the few who would have followed Socrates around and thought, this guy is the guy, man. Naya would be one of the many, the majority of Athenians. In fact, they found him so annoying that they killed him. They put him on trial for corrupting the youth and for insulting the gods. And they actually gave him an ultimatum. They said, you leave town or we'll kill you. And he's like, cool, kill me, which may strike us as an odd choice. But in doing that, what Socrates was trying to do was say, my mission is more important than my life. If I shut up and go home, then everything I've been doing, and everything I've been doing, by the way, has been done because I love people. And I want people to be the best versions of themselves. I want them to have the best life possible. In order to do that, we've got to understand what life actually is and what goodness actually is. So he was willing to die in exchange for that. But philosophy didn't die with Socrates, because Socrates left behind a core group of students. The most noteworthy of Socrates' students was this fellow whose face is covered up, was this fellow on the left, Plato, lived from 428 to 348 BC. Plato opened up a school called the Academy, which sounds boring because we all know many schools called academies. No, Plato's was the first. Everything in the history of that's ever been named anything academy has been named in honor of Plato's school. That's how foundational he was to education. Plato had a much younger contemporary and student by the name of Aristotle. So when the two met, Plato was about 60, 62, and Aristotle was 17 when Aristotle joined the academy, first as a student, then as an assistant teacher, and then after Plato's death went on to found his own school called the Lyceum. These are two men who were incredibly close friends, incredibly influential people, incredibly brilliant people who loved one another in a teacher-student way very deeply, and yet viewed the world completely opposite from each other. And to Plato's great credit, Plato didn't like to hog the microphone. There were no microphones at the time, but he didn't like to hog the microphone. So when he saw that one of his students, Aristotle, was extraordinarily talented, he would say, Aristotle, get in here and you teach too here at the academy. Even though Aristotle would get up after Plato every day and say, everything Plato just told you is bull. They viewed the world completely differently. Much of the history of thought that comes after them for the 2,300, 2,400 years since their time can really boil down and reduce to the tension between Plato's way of viewing reality and Aristotle's way of viewing reality. Plato becomes the father of all spirituality in the West because Plato's driving theme is this: I want to find the things that are eternal, that last forever, and the things that are perfect. And anything less than eternal and perfect is somehow less than real. Everything our senses experience, nothing our senses experience are eternal or perfect, right? This drink is neither eternal. It's good, but it's not eternal. You know, it's got a drink by date, and it was poured at a certain time into this can sometime in the last couple of months, I imagine. It will cease to be very shortly because I continue to slam it. Our senses only encounter things that are temporary and things that are imperfect. Therefore, Plato says what our senses encounter is not what's really real. We waste our time, Plato says, when we focus on the things of this world that don't last, that change, that are not perfect. We let those things shackle us and distract us. There must out there, this is a very short version of Plato, but out there must be realities that are not physical, because all physical things are temporary and imperfect. Realities that are spiritual, for lack of a better term, that are perfect and can never change. In fact, there's a better spiritual world out there. And we're sort of trapped temporarily in this world of flesh. But if we detach ourselves from the distracting physical things of this world, at the end of our lives, our souls can be freed to go back where they belong. His version of heaven. Yes. And in fact, what we commonly think of as heaven is in large part based on what Plato would have called the world of ideas or the world of forms. And we don't have to go into great depth on why he called it that. If you took my humanities class, we did spend like 2 months on that. And hopefully you get a chance to engage this material more depth in the future. Aristotle looks at what Plato said and he said, Plato, where do you find evidence for any of this? And Plato said, you don't need physical evidence. Physical evidence is not reliable because your senses can lie to you. Physical evidence is no good. Only reason will point you to the truth. Aristotle says, without physical evidence, reason by itself is useless because your senses are your only source of knowledge. All knowledge comes to us through our senses. So no amount of standing in the corner and thinking really hard and meditating really hard is going to get you to anything that's real. Plato, I love you, man. In fact, Aristotle's exact words were, dear indeed is Plato, but dearer still is truth. And Plato's words about Aristotle were, Aristotle kicked me like a newborn pony kicks its mother. Aristotle becomes the father of all science in the West. Plato's the great rationalist and idealist. Aristotle's the great empiricist. And something is empirical if we have sensory evidence for it. And the great realist. The two conflicting views of the world that the tension between them really explains all of Western thought that's come since then. And I've named this lesson The Cave in the Light. I've named it after a book that tells the story of how this is the foundation of the West. I'm not assigning that for this ethics course, but I am going to provide you a free electronic copy of the book because I very, very highly recommend it. Between the two of them, they give us what philosophy's two hands are, what philosophy's two tools are. Philosophy uses reason and philosophy uses evidence. That's the bread and butter of philosophy. If you're using anything else, it doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're dumb. But to the extent you're using anything other than reason and evidence, you're not doing philosophy. So authority, tradition, faith, imagination, those aren't bad things. They all may have roles to play in your life, and a philosopher doesn't necessarily reject any or all of them. But to the extent you're relying on those things, you're not doing philosophy. You're doing philosophy when you're using reason and evidence. what combination of reason versus evidence, how to balance the two, that's an enduring, ongoing question of philosophy. So let's say I really believe in the daily horoscope in the newspaper. Let's just say I sort of swear by the horoscope every day. Any decision making I make based on the horoscope, that's the seers that tell you they can tell the future based on the patterns in the stars. Any decisions I make up based on those, they might be good decisions or bad decisions, but I'm not doing philosophy while I'm reading the horoscope. Unless I have first, and I'm not suggesting that this can be done well, but perhaps it can. It's not my place to tell you whether it can or cannot. If you have first made an argument based on reason and evidence for why the horoscope is a reliable source, you can then integrate the horoscope into your philosophy and do philosophy. But in and of itself, relying on a horoscope, relying on family traditions, relying on the Bible or the Quran, again, they're not necessarily bad things to do or wrong things to do. But unless we first made the rational or evidence-based case that those are reliable sources, what we're doing is not philosophy. And that can be okay. If I tell you that Abraham Lincoln was a good president, I'm not doing any math. That doesn't say anything bad about math. I just happen not to be doing math at the moment. If you take either Plato's approach or Aristotle's approach in isolation, we can run into trouble. I don't think I think it's very difficult to strike a perfect balance between them because they're so different. I think ultimately everybody must choose to have one in the driver's seat and the other in the back seat, sort of criticizing the way one's driving. I think that's the only way to approach them, to try to balance them 50-50. They just cancel too much of each other out. But to overuse one approach or the other, to overuse reason at the expense of evidence, or to overuse evidence at the expense of reason, I think can get us into trouble. Plato's weakness seems to me to be that he focuses so much on what's perfect, what's ideal, that he ignores too much of the real world that we actually have to live in. Even if it's the case that there's a better, higher world and our destiny is to go there forever. Unless we happen to die right now, it's not forever yet. And we've got X number of years on this world that we've got to focus on first. And most people who believe in a better, higher world out there think that the way we spend our lives in this world impacts how we'll spend our time in the better, higher world. So Plato, being so focused on another world, so focused on what's perfect, ignores what's self-evidently real. But Aristotle, who I've shown here digging around in the dirt for bugs, because that's what he does. He's extraordinary. The number of disciplines that he not only mastered, but invented. He invented the discipline of biology and psychology and literary criticism. He mastered more things than I can even list on a piece of paper. But he spends so much time focusing on what's real that I think he misses out on opportunities to call us to rise above the way things actually are. There are, in his own day, he comes from ancient Greece. I love ancient Greece. I love the ancient Greeks, or I wouldn't teach the things that I do, but ancient Greece had some problems. Ancient Greece was a slave state. Ancient Greece was, even by ancient world standards, was very anti-woman. And some of those things Aristotle just aped as a matter of fact, because they're just the way things are. He's too busy strapping animals down and cutting them open to see how their kidneys work, to call on us to change the world for the better. But if we try to find a balance between the two that puts one in the driver's seat, in my opinion, you don't have to share my opinion. In my opinion, I think it needs to be Aristotle in the driver's seat, and with Plato in the back seat, given plenty of space and room to speak up with the loyal opposition, You might choose to do things in reverse, but it's just my thoughts on Plato and Aristotle, the fundamental figures of philosophy. Why this talk of philosophy? Because ethics is philosophy. It's one of the branches of philosophy. There are many. We could have built a chart that had 100 branches, but these are the core and most important of them. Metaphysics, which is the philosophy of being itself. Metaphysics asks, what is being? What is existence? What is real? Aesthetics asks, what is beautiful? Epistemology asks, what is knowledge? So what does it mean to know things? And then how do we know things? What counts as reliable sources of knowledge? Logic is the breakdown. Once we know what knowledge is, logic, which is another science invented by Aristotle, logic looks at the particular process. How do we reason our way toward whatever real knowledge is? Political philosophy. How should our societies first be organized and then be governed? Ethics, the way the chart says what is of value, I would restate that as what is good. What is good, especially in our relationships with other people, which would then make politics a child of ethics, right? So metaphysics, aesthetics, epistemology, logic, politics, and ethics. We're, of course, focused on ethics in this course. We'll do a little metaphysics tomorrow, but then it's going to be ethics all the way down. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to you. If it is January 2024 and you're watching this on YouTube, you'll check Schoology for an assignment for you to do. So thanks for joining us on YouTube, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you, Sarah Resnick, Naya, Rhea, and Carlos is hiding back there.
Behind her chair.
So yeah, me again for just like 20 seconds. I left off what our working class definition of philosophy is going to be for our time together. Humanities folks have heard this already. Philosophy is a love of wisdom that seeks rational answers to big questions so that we may live and die well. Nobody wants to live poorly. We may define living well differently, but I've never heard anyone say that I just want to have the most miserable failure of a life ever. And nobody wants to die poorly. Nobody wants to die, but guess what? You don't know this part, right? Everybody will. Everybody will. To the extent that we can control how that happens, I think we'd like to have a good death, not a bad death.
I have heard of people that would go against the saying that they want to die, no, that they don't want to die.
Sure. Generally speaking, the biological instinct to survival, and we'll shelve. I mean, there's a possible exception for people who are in incredible physical pain due to incurable illness. But generally, when we speak to someone, if that person doesn't have a desire to live, we're worried about that person's mental health, not so much as intelligence. Within the bell curve of rational people, mentally healthy, we all want to live. Hopefully, we all want to live well. That's the goal of philosophy, and this is our class definition of philosophy. Okay, video over for real this time, lest I think of something else.
Walk around a lot a bit, trying to make the pieces fit to a puzzle with a million bits and pieces. When I'm feeling fine is when I discover that I'm afraid to blow my cover, and there's something very wrong with this. So slip back in your hole, or get back in your cave. If I'm going down, I'm taking someone with me.